and seizing the available tools for the European Union to develop winning strategies to halt deforestation, a big momentous issue. We have great panelists here today. Let me introduce how we are going to organize our webinar, and first introduce myself. My name is João Pacheco. I'm a senior fellow in Farm Europe. We'll have first Mr. Pascal Canfin. You know him, he's the chairman of the Environmental Committee in the European Parliament, that will make introductory remarks. And then we'll have two panels. The first panel with Mr. Eric Souberin, Director of Sustainability in Danone. Mr. Francois Lombard is the head of intelligence business in AIRBUS Defense and Space. And also Mr. Bastien Sachet is the CEO of EarthWorm. And then we'll have a second panel with Mr. Benjamin Lamer. He's a farmer, he's a member of the Avrik Group and president of the Green Energy Platform of Farm Europe. We'll have also Mr. Herbert Dorfman, he's a member of the European Parliament. And we'll have from the European Commission, Director General for Environment, Mr. Jorge Rodriguez Romero. And then we'll have final remarks by another member of the European Parliament, Ms. Irène Tolleret. Each panelist will have maximum 10 minutes. And why? Because we'll attempt at the end of each panel to have questions and answers from the public. And I invite the public to use the Q&A button to put forward the questions they would like me to ask the panelists, and also give the opportunity for members in the panel to come back to what has been said. As you know, everything will be in English, and so we have just one language, which incidentally is not the mother tongue of anyone in the panel, but it's the lingua franca of this webinar. Mr. Canfin, we'll be ready to give you the floor if you are available.
I am.
Oh, and thank you very much for being here with us. It's an honor. Please, you have the floor, Mr. Canfin.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you, special thank you for my colleagues and notably Irène, who will make the conclusive remarks. Thank you for Farm Europe for what you're doing and what you have been doing on the issues you're covering. As you said at the beginning, we are in a very special timing when it comes to the fight against deforestation. I will focus my speech on the deforestation imported, from exports, because you know, and Mr. Dorfman will probably raise it. The issue of forest and deforestation, or the fight against deforestation, is it's a bit differently treated in the Parliament, whether you talk about external dimension or you talk about domestic dimension. So I will focus first on the project we have to progressively stop. So it's not overnight, but progressively stop imported deforestation for the key commodities we have all in mind and that are responsible for the whole bulk of the imported deforestation: cocoa, coffee, soybean, EVA, palm oil, and so on. Why? Because we consider that we cannot keep on giving access to a market to commodities that are in a way produced, harvested exactly leading to the contrary impact that we are pushing for when it comes to climate and biodiversity. We have to be consistent. And that's the starting point. And of course, we need to know if it's feasible to do zero deforestation commodities, because it's a good starting point to say, well, I do not want to contribute to imported deforestation, but if you can't do otherwise, it's another story. So that's why for the last 6 months and 12 months, sorry, we have been working with some companies like Danone, and Eric Soubeyran will give his own analysis of what is the good practice for zero deforestation. So we have been working with companies that have taken commitments on zero deforestation. Let's say more or less since the New York Declaration 2014. And they have been testing it. They have been operating on different options, technologically wise, legally wise, depending on the context they are in, depending on the commodities, depending on the role they play on the value chain and so on. So we gathered all this information. And we ended up with the strong conviction that it is feasible. It is feasible, again, progressively, not overnight, but it's feasible to decrease significantly and then close to zero. And it's feasible to operate and giving enough guarantee that you are debt-free on your value chain regarding the key commodities I just mentioned. It is feasible. So it is needed. It is feasible. So now we need to scale it up. Because what the companies that have been operating on that matter for the last 5 years, I would say, what they are telling to us that, well, it's good that I do it, but I'm 1%, 2%, 0.5%. And if we want to be serious with biodiversity, climate, and so on, and if we want to be serious with the level playing field, then of course, we need to have a standard that will make sure that if you want to access the European market, progressively you want to have the demonstration that you are debt-free. We have the tools. I guess that some of the next panelists will focus more on the tools we have from space or from the ground and connecting the two. So we know how to do it. So now our role is to make sure that we do it and we do it right. Doing it right, for instance, is, well, we cannot ask corporates to go for that and being able to demonstrate that this commodity is debt-free or was debt-free even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It's not feasible. So that's why we had a debate within the parliament on what is the right cutoff date. And I think that we have to have a cutoff date that is, of course, a few years ago, but not that many years ago, because otherwise you cannot have a robust commitment. So that's the kind of discussion I'm very open to have. But on the principle, there is a very, very clear majority, both in the parliament and in the commission, with the commitment from the commission to go with this text in June, I think, June, July, I can't remember, and it will happen. So very happy to have the views from the various stakeholders, because it will have a direct impact on the way you operate, but the direction of travel is very, very clear. Then, if you allow me to additional remarks. The first one is that, of course, on the ground, we need to work with the countries, with the regions, with the local authorities, with the producers, with the cooperatives that are producing the commodities we are talking about. Because it's not a non-cooperative agenda. I insist on it. It's not a non-cooperative agenda. It's a consistency agenda. But of course, what we want is precisely that they change the practices year after year. So in order to get there, we need to work with them. So that's why I think it would make a lot of sense if the EU, when having this legislation first negotiated and then in place, will at the same time, in parallel, work with this ODA, so Overseas Development Aid, okay, precisely to help producers, probably starting with the small ones, because the biggest ones have probably the capacity to do so themselves, but the small ones may not, making sure that we move with them on this D-free journey, I would say. And the second and last remark is about for our farmers, because it means that we have to be consistent as well in the CAP. And that's why the Parliament is pushing also for being able to produce more protein, more soybean, more protein domestically, so that we can progressively rebalance what we import and what we produce on our soil, I would say. And it means, again, consistency between the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, and that kind of regulation. And it's our role, and that's why we work more and more actually together between the ENVI Committee and the Agri Committee in the Parliament to make sure that we provide something which is consistent at the end for the planet, but also for the corporates, for the investors, and for the farmers all over the value chain. The last remark is that it is something that, to my view, will have a very important impact also for the consumers. I mean, when you look at the polls, it's very clear that the consumer would favor a product that is D-free instead of a product that does not guarantee that. Of course, today they don't know. They don't know because there is no label, no information, no standard, no rule, so they don't know. But as soon as they would know, then having the D-free label or whatever would be, to my view, a market argument that will probably as well create a market premium for the commodities that will be D-free label. So that's why I think it's a good way to proceed, and we are very, very supportive in the Parliament, and myself, of course, of this legislation, and we are already actually working, and DG Envie is working hard on it. We are working with them to make sure that we have a very good and already pre-agreed, I would say, text back in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Canfin, for your very clear comments. And thank you again for being here with us today. Much appreciated. If I may now initiate the first panel and ask Mr. Eric Soubrain, he's Director of Sustainability in Danone, to take the floor, please.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much to Farm Europe for your kind invitation. As an introduction, I just want to say that I think I and we all need to be very humble when it comes to this topic of deforestation, that indeed is extremely complex, but that need to be tackled in a very decisive manner. And I really welcome this panel today and this initiative launched by the European Commission and especially the Environmental Commission, because this is indeed very important for the food industry in which Danone is operating. Danone took alongside to many companies in the New York Declaration in 2014 a commitment to remove deforestation from our supply chain by 2020. And I want to talk a little bit about this a period of time where we've tried and we have decisively put in place a lot of things to first of all know our supply chain in detail through a traceability exercise on our commodities, try to put in place mitigation measures, engage our suppliers to a point where in 2020 we reached basically a level that is, I would say, compliant with our commitment. But we are not, despite that, in a place to say that we have removed deforestation from our supply chain. And I think that's a very big point. We have done the traceability exercise. We put in place for our palm oil, for instance, a fully segregated sourcing strategy. even in the US, where there were no segregation strategy on the US market. We have also worked with a lot of label on paper and for instance, to make sure that we are buying paper that have a certain standard, so on and so forth. And despite that, it is clear that the theory of change at that time was not sufficient. It was not sufficient. And I think we all need, in all modesty, to acknowledge that. And it was not sufficient for a very important reason, which is the very heart of a zero deforestation strategy is not to label or pinpoint any commodity specifically, but it's to make sure that you create a supply chain that is fully traceable. And I think one of the points that is very important is we are in 2021, and the technologies, the tool, and I hope tomorrow the legislation in European Union should allow us to create a context where traceability, transparency is becoming a norm, not an exception. And I think that's very important, and this is indeed what the customer wants. So if I take a very concrete example in our supply chain, you know that Danone is the leader globally in yogurts, in dairy products. So we buy milk with 50,000 farms, 4,000 in Europe, directly every day. We don't own the farms. The farmers decide the type of soy they are buying to feed their cows. We cannot dictate what they're going to buy. And those farmers buy indeed soy complements, but they buy soy that are available in the European market. And there is no process right now to have traceability end-to-end for this soy when it arrives at port in Europe, to know where it's coming from at the beginning. And this is where the normalization is very important. The traceability is very important. And we need to break this glass window in a way to make sure that this traceability is possible. 10 years ago, let's be clear, it was very complex to put in place. Technologies was not there, but today, technology is there, and it should help us to create this traceability. So I think that's one thing that for us is very important. And every player in the chain has its responsibility. I think this is why, for instance, we are continuing on our commitment to have segregation of our raw material, because this is also what consumer wants. And I agree with Mr. Canfin here when he says that the consumer wants traceability. They want to know where their food is coming from, and they are increasingly ready to pay a certain premium for it. Not maybe as much as we want, let's be clear, but a certain premium for it. This is correct. So this is one element that I think we can activate to channel basically this transformation. The second element that probably is also to be considered is, of course, the use of technology. I think it was very well mentioned also by Pascal Canfin. We have, and I think my colleagues after will be much more eloquent than me, but there are satellites around us that are able to map. We are in 2021. We have algorithm. We're able to map things. So in a way, everything is there to make it happen. And I think the proposal of the Environmental Commission to, in a way, suggest to the Commission to have a traceability data point as a principle to entry in Europe is a very interesting proposal. It's pragmatic and it's technologically possible. So I think this is an area where we welcome very much the initiative that is currently initiated. And there is a third dimension to the debate that I think we should, as Europeans, not forget either. Is that when we import things, we really need to understand if fundamentally we would not be better off to produce that locally. And I think we've seen with the crisis right now that food sovereignty is something that is extremely important in the way we need to think the future of the European continent, but not only. So this is why, for instance, this is a third lever we are activating in Danone. So segregation, traceability, And of course, the third one is relocalization of some of our production as close as possible from where we are manufacturing. We have projects right now running in Bavaria or in Normandy to relocalize soy production for cow feed. And this is something that is very, very important as well. And we have the chance in Europe to have an agronomical landscape that can allow us to reach this food sovereignty. So there is, and that's something that I think is very important, to use some of the European tools like the CAP to encourage the farmers to diversify their rotation of crops to make sure we reach the highest level possible of protein autonomy. And that's an element that will by itself reduce significantly the risk of imported deforestation. So by combining these forces, I think we as Mr. Canfin said, we have the possibility really to structurally change the way we operate and reduce significantly the deforestation. And that's one of our core pillars. That's a commitment. We are on that journey. We would have loved in 2020 to be in a position to say that we are zero deforested. We did, basically, we implemented all the strategy, but we're still lacking some bullets to make it happen. And we are ready to contribute, taking the responsibility we need in the supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvain, for sharing with us the experience of your company and also the needs looking forward to how to halt and contribute to halting deforestation. And let me move immediately to Mr. Francois Lombard. I think we are going to hear a lot about what can be done technologically in Europe today. Again, you are the head of intelligence business in AIRBUS. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. And indeed, what is intelligent business is about the satellite imagery and services. So as a matter of fact, I will show you a few images. And if you allow me, I will go directly to that. So also responding to what was said just before, there are some technologies available, more and more. There is a lot of data available. And as a matter of fact, it's a question of using this data and putting it in the right hands with the right tools to take the right actions. And I will try to show you a bit what has been already done and what can be done more. AIRBUS, you may know or may not know, is indeed not only doing aircraft and helicopters, but also operating a large fleet of satellites for Earth observation, and actually with an experience and an archive of data of more than 20 years. So it gives us basically positions where we are in the front seat to see what happens on the environment since a very long time. And we started to think, indeed, a few years ago, seeing all these changes in the environment, how can we impact more? What could we bring to this to the society and to the different stakeholders to make the no deforestation commitment something that really happens? We worked with EarthWorm, and Bastien will also explain you a bit afterwards how we turn that into actions. Now, why is it so complex and why satellite imagery has an impact there? First of all, as you can imagine, we are speaking about forests all over the world, from Asia to South America to Europe and so on. So it really calls for a global approach. It was just mentioned before, it's about import and export, and it's about understanding what happens end to end in the food industry, in the food chain, and how to act on it. Unfortunately, 75% of the deforestation is actually linked to agriculture. And that makes it a complex topic, because agriculture, as we know, it's about economy, it's about food, it's about society, and it's about environmental impact, which are sometimes very far away from us. And at the same time, it was said before, the people who are consuming are sometimes so far away, they don't actually know what happens. And that's where, indeed, the global approach and the monitoring you can build with satellites and other types of data is very helpful in this type of situation. indeed, the EU committed to address this imported deforestation topic. This is clear, but also a lot of companies. We would just mention Danone, but there are many others who are looking at the topic since a few years. And the good situation is that actually technology is helping more and more on this edge. Technology with data, technology with cloud and AI, and also the scientific excellence that we have built over a very long time about understanding what happens with agriculture, with the different aspects of what you can see on the images. So now let me show you an actual image from a satellite. Here you see an image in Sumatra from a Spot 6 satellite. And what you see here is that from very far away, it's actually very complex to fully understand what's behind all this green and brown that you see on the pictures. There are different aspects of the forest here. There are replanted forests, there are conservation forests, there are plantations, and there are also cadasters and people who are actually living around this forest. And when you start to look at very, very large coverage, full countries, it starts to get extremely complex, and for sure something you cannot do only with human eyes. That's where in 2016 we decided to build what we call the Starling Solutions together with EarthWorm, which was about using the base map, so actually all the mapping that we have done over the last 20 years. We have an enormous amount of data, also using Copernicus, which is European Union program. And we started to monitor on a regular basis and to generate alerts, very precise alerts on where are the issues happening. And that's very important because indeed we need to focus our attentions where it really matters. And we need to use data which is so reliable that you can take real actions. I think it was said just before, the point of taking actions where actually the people very far away understand why we ask them to change is very important. And that's where the facts are extremely, are the earth actually of this solution. Just to show you how it looks like, and here I will go very quickly through 20 years of actually movement of on the forest around Borneo. You see the yellow part, this is actually the expansions of the pile-on plantations over this area. Here you don't see a satellite imagery anymore, you see actually something which we have built on top of the satellite imagery to be able actually to generate alerts. Moving forward and zooming a bit at that, this is typically the map that we have generated. So they are fully automatically generated now, and they enable us to actually follow on the satellite imagery that we monitor and operate every day, what's happening in terms of movement. Here, and I hope you can see a bit the different aspects. What you see in terms of red dots, this is AI-based alerts, which enables us to say, okay, here something is happening. It's very recent, and it's very clearly something linked to deforestation. And this enables us, correlating that with a lot of information we have on the different mills, on the supply chain of the industry, to look at it more in details, to monitor, to make the correlations with other data, and actually decide what type of actions needs to be taken. This is where also foundations like EarthWorms or other people who are really foot on the ground are really helpful because they get this information very factual and they can take out of it the decisions on what type of actions can be taken. What you see here is typically a daily alert that you will see on the desk of typically a big food company, which is watching at what's happening around its supply chain. The point you see in the middle is a mill, which is identified, and we can see the different alerts around the mills, and we can correlate with the distance and say whether something is happening which is wrong and which generate an action. Without going too much into details, from that, we will generate reports, and these reports will be used actually to discuss with the local people, with the local industry, so that we can take actions. And the most important here to have in mind is that it's factual, it's at scale, so we can look at very, very large area. It's at speed, because we are using AI and we are using fully automatic data flows. And where it was actually a very hard work, but I think we got there, it's becoming simple in a way that you can generate a discussions with the different stakeholders linked to this happening. And when it's simple and it's factual, then you can turn it into action. So I strongly believe, and again, thank you for the opportunity to show that there are now really things which are so advanced and so mature that we can really turn that into something impactful along with the EU policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lombard, for your presentation on the capabilities of your system. And I believe it's closely linked to what the next speaker, Mr. Bastien Sachet, the CEO of EarthWorm, is also prepared to develop. Please, Mr. Sachet, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again to Farmer Up for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So I'm just putting in presentation mode. So just to say, EarthWorm is an organization that has worked for 20 years now to address deforestation. We have a simple philosophy, which is to leverage the power of supply chains to have a positive impact on the world. I think supply chains are actually driving the most impact. So if we can work at the roots of those supply chains, we can really address most of the issues around climate, biodiversity, or social issues that are present in the products we consume. If we do a quick retrospective, in 2010, a bit more than 10 years ago, Nestlé took the first no deforestation company commitment under pressure from NGOs. I think they put that into their sourcing policy, and I think many companies followed straight after, allowing for this quest, like Eric highlighted, this quest for traceability, for understanding where the products come from, where the raw materials come from. Soon after, there was a New York Declaration on Forest, the Amsterdam Declaration as well was enforced, which was a push by the government. And I think the latest push, which is driven by investors as well as government, as well as companies around climate, is just putting even more emphasis on forest. Over these 10 years, there has been a growing knowledge about how supply chains are connected to deforestation, what are the drivers, what is really happening on the ground. But the key challenge that remains is how do we measure, how do we implement, and how do we verify? Many certification systems or labels that exist today are not able to provide these guarantees. So the one key worry or concern that we had at the time is, okay, it's great to have all these companies committing to no deforestation, but how do we actually check that this environmental quality in the supply chain is present? So that's where we teamed up with AIRBUS in 2016 to create Starling. And after a few years of piloting and developing, leveraging on AIRBUS capabilities, or sending feet in the field on our side, just ground truth what the satellite tells us, we've managed to onboard a number of companies. Here's a sample of the companies that are fully using Starling on 100% of their volumes. And this allows this company to have, on a daily basis, reports that put in the hands of their buyers, the decision makers in terms of market leverage. It puts the reports that equip them to have meaningful conversation with their suppliers. With that in hand, they can either suspend, challenge, or validate the performance of suppliers that are selling them palm oil, for example. And therefore, the discussions are much more informed, and on the ground, a lot of change is accelerating at supplier level, be it in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Peru, or elsewhere where this palm oil is produced, because suddenly they know their client is aware of what's happening. I just want to give you two examples that are meaningful and interesting in areas of concerns in terms of deforestation. So if you take the Loser ecosystem and the Aceh district in Indonesia, is one where we've applied Starling at scale. And one thing that is interesting is, of course, the companies that are connected to these little green squares you see on the screen, which are plantations, likes of Danone, Nestle, etc. They've taken action. They've been informed by what's happening, and they've taken action with their suppliers. But it's not just that. There is also deforestation from smallholders. There is also a share of the market that doesn't necessarily go to Europe. And so we've engaged the local government. And what we've done is we've put in his hands the Starling map. and we said, here is the reality of what's happening at district level in your region. And here is how you could take control and influence that the future of that region. Indonesia has got climate commitments. There is a pressure on deforestation. It's not attractive on their side for investors. So we really equipped them with this. And as a result, he issued a moratorium on new palm oil licenses for the region. That was for 3 years, sorry. And so no new licenses for concession, which leads after to deforestation, has been given in the forest area. The ability to know that with precision helped a lot. As a result, we've seen a large decrease in deforestation in this landscape, which is extremely encouraging, which means that not only the pressure from the downstream, the companies that buy in Europe or in the US, the palm oil has exerted a positive pressure, but also the local authorities have been equipped to make better decisions. Another example in the same flavor is the work that we've done in Ivory Coast, where we started to monitor about an 80,000 hectares forest reserve, one of the last forest reserves that has not been destroyed in Ivory Coast. And we all know the government has aimed for recovering at least a 20% forest cover. And nonetheless, the trend is going the other way. So the forests are disappearing. And so what we did is we tried to figure out how can we detect deforestation for cocoa. And the challenge is the forests are not cut with bulldozers like for palm oil. People go underneath the canopy. They start to degrade the underneath of the canopy, and they start planting the cocoa. It's only a few years later that the big trees are burnt or killed. And this is when the cocoa becomes visible to the satellites. So with AIRBUS teams, we've said, okay, there might be some changes of colors or things that we can detect from the sky that we could teach, the machines to detect automatically. So we send people on the ground and they said, here is a degradation. And every time we'd send the plot to AIRBUS, which would register that. And so we managed to find a way with spectroscopy, etc., to detect what's happening beneath canopy from the sky. So we've given the government a very detailed map of the actual degradation of their forest, which is attacked for gold in the north and mostly cocoa everywhere else. And they realized, oh, the degradation state is much worse than what we thought. And the next step was to equip the teams of the government, which were going completely randomly in the forest to try to catch illegal encroachers, to be equipped with that data to actually target better where the deforestation or the degradation is happening. And here is the result. So we had per quarter 1,500 hectares of forest being cleared for cocoa, and about 6 quarters later, year and a half later, we fell to 100 hectares, which means that with the simple fact of equipping the teams with the right data, we were able to achieve some results. So one thing that I want to highlight, and I think it was said previously, not only can this tool be useful to companies at scale and allow them to mutualize their verification globally of their supply chains. We've got a European champion, which is AIRBUS, that does that. And I think there is a huge opportunity to leverage that. On the other hand, it's a matter of cooperation, because if it's just about controlling and excluding the risky areas, it's not going to achieve the objectives that we are seeking globally in terms of climate. We might feel good about it, but we might not achieve the global objective. So I think we could absolutely leverage this tool as a cooperation tool and put this tool in the hands of governments so that they start to have accurate information to manage their deforestation. No government is today actively willing to deforest because it just paints a very bad picture towards investors or towards the rest of the world. So there is an opportunity there that I think is sizable, and these little examples that I've shown at the regional level are just an inspiration of what could be triggered more globally and at European level. So I'll stop here and welcome questions afterwards. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sachet. I think that was a very impressive presentation of yours, complementing the one from AIRBUS. Now, we have some time for some interaction between the panelists. So please feel free to complement something that you wanted to say or react to anything that was said. And perhaps I would kickstart with a question that I got from the public. It's not an easy one, but I'll put it to you. The question is from someone that says that they've been monitoring palm oil supply chain for 5 years using optical imagery and radar, but they face two problems. One is that most of the deforestation in Southeast Asia apparently is considered as legal deforestation and conversion of the forest, which is legal in those countries. And so there is an issue here on timeliness of using your means, and I believe also an issue of the adequacy of the legal framework in those countries. But I open the floor. I don't know who wants to answer first. Mr. Soubrin.
Well, I think it's I don't know if I'm the best place to answer this, but I think we of course, I think the question is spot on in a way that we know that many agriculture ingredients, because I hate to call them commodities, are driving, of course, the livelihoods of hundreds of millions and billions of people around the globe. So this is by essence a political issue in many of the countries, and this has been at the heart of a very recent discussion between Indonesia and the European Union. So I think to the point that Bastien was making earlier, I think this can only be solved by collaboration and showing that we can inject differently the value that is created in the value chain. Because it cannot be a lose-lose scenario, it has to be a win-win scenario. And I think when I read the question, I think there need to be a really at a multilateral or bilateral way, a way to rethink the way we are sharing the value in the value chain to solve that issue. But that's really my very simple and complex answer at the same time. But that's probably the only way to make it happen in a profitable way for all the parties.
Well, thank you. Mr. Lombard, Mr. Sachet, do you want to jump in?
Well, I would jump in, but I guess Bastien is even more foot on the ground on the topic. But this being said, maybe just one point of view. It's a bit about the carrot and the stick, you know. We have the opportunity in the current context to set the rules at European Union level. And obviously it will impact the way we look at this deforestation, whether it is authorized or not authorized. It is also our duty to define the rules of entering the European markets. So that's the stick, if I may say. The carrot is obviously when you have the data available and it's really factual. As we said before, it's an opportunity to discuss with them, to show them also the benefits of not taking some specific local rules, to show them the economic and environmental benefits from it. And that's where we need really to build these discussions. And maybe, I think it was said at the very beginning, it needs to be put in common with some aid for the people who really need to make this transition. So that's the carrot part. And we need to play on the both sides.
Yes, I would completely support that. And maybe give another example of what can be done. Because of course, the tool today and the quantity of images has been used to monitor and verify. But I just give you an example. In Indonesia and in Africa, you have a lot of plantations of oil palm that are old. They are like 30 years old. And most smallholders have these kind of plantations, and they don't replant because they don't want to cut the trees and have no harvest for 3 or 4 years. And so the challenge is that they stay with very low productive plantations, and then they go in the forest. A lot of the deforestation we see nowadays in Indonesia is done by smallholders. And no one is able to fix that. Imagine if with Starling, we're able to see the age of plantation. Okay, we can see when a palm tree appeared on the planet. because we're looking at time series in time. So what it means is that you can give the government, who have funds, by the way, to fund this replanting, but don't know where to do it or who to give the money to. We can give them exactly where are the smallholders that need to be replant their plantations. And this is a huge help for them potentially. So I think this kind of usage can be developed and can be put in the hands of government. Beyond monitoring, you've got lots of applications that can be leveraged through such a tool. And I think the governments would very much welcome that.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you, Mr. Lombard, or you, Mr. Sachet, you want to add something to what you've said already. I acknowledge that Mr. Soubrin had to even, as well as Mr. Pascal Canfin. Please, if you have something to add, it's the moment now. Otherwise, I'll pass to the next panel.
Maybe general message. I'm extremely happy to see that European Union is really jumping on the topic now, not only in terms of commitment, but in terms of putting the rules and the framework that would enable to have really a large impact. I think I can say, I can speak for the industry that we are ready to make the jump. And I see as well really that the food industry is really working hard to find a way forward. So now let's get the rules ready and let's work on that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lombard. Thank you, Mr. Sachet, for your presentations and for your participation here today. I now move to the second panel.
Thank you.
As you know, we have Mr. Benjamin Lamer. Benjamin, you are a farmer, you are a member of the AIRBUS group and the president of the Green Energy Platform. You have the floor.
Thank you, Joao. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm very pleased to participate to this panel. And as a farmer, I'm also in charge of sustainability in the interbranch organization for vegetable oil and vegetable proteins in France. So I'm very committed at the French level about these subjects. And I'm also committed with this subject on my own farm, because I'm cultivating wheat and maize for biofuels, and I have to prove the sustainability of these biofuels. And I want to tell you a story also about my production of soybean for soy milk. I have to prove through an audit that on my farm in the eastern part of France, in Alsace, there was no child labor, no slavery, no land spoliation of small or poor farmers, and no cut of rainforest. So it might be surprising, but if you think about it, you may notice that maybe sometimes in the world it could happen. And it's a good question to ask when some production are entering in the EU market. So about the deforestation, when we are studying the available data by the FAO reports on deforestation, we realize that the problem is really serious, and it is often linked, among others, to some specific feed or food production, such as palm oil. Between 1990 and 2015, 129 million hectares of forest disappeared. And according to the UNEP, besides illegal logging and fire, widespread investment in palm oil plantation are the leading cause of rainforest destruction in Southeast Asia. In this period, for instance, palm cultivation expanding had a factor of 7 times in Indonesia and 2 times in Malaysia. So I think European Union should then act properly by not directly or indirectly causing deforestation by attracting farmers abroad to massively deforest in order to plant crops, which are then exported as agricultural product or transform goods to Europe. We have seen that happening many times before. Thus, I welcome the resolution that the European Parliament approved the last October, asking the Commission to propose a EU legal framework to halt and reverse EU-driven global deforestation. The sustainable use of forest and ecosystem in many parts of the world cannot be ensured with the current policies. And there is something I want you to remember. While imported palm oil from the tropics can indeed cause deforestation, this is not the case with feedstock grown in Europe. Whilst their production was on the rise, forest land was also expanding in the EU. For instance, the biofuels produced in EU are both sustainable and not causing deforestation. On the contrary, biofuels produced from palm oil are not sustainable and are causing year after year massive deforestation in many parts of the world. They should be totally banned from the EU market, and the co-legislator will have a chance to further strengthen this ban when reviewing the RED II directive next June. So I think the main issue is to clear-cut the link between deforestation and biofuel use in Europe, both for its import of biofuels and feedstock used for biofuel production from areas at risk of deforestation. The European Union should build an efficient system of verification of deforestation-free export certificates made by exporting countries. Such certification should be a precondition for authorization of entry of these products into the territory of the European Union. The third-party schemes certification on labels such as deforestation-free are welcome, but they should only be complementary to stronger and binding measures. We should avoid completely self-certification while at the same time put in place a system on due diligence that not rely only on paper guarantees from operator or certification organization, in particular those in third countries where deforestation is taking place and controls are deficient, but based on digital and neutral satellite-based monitor system like Starling. This is why it is necessary to independently monitor the evolution of deforestation using remote sensing and accredited EU operators and confront the information gathered with the declaration of the operators. So in conclusion, let's work together to prohibit or limit as much as possible all regulation or legislation in the EU that could have counterproductive effect of causing deforestation anywhere in the world, while preserving and encouraging EU farmers to continue the pathway towards the sustainable development of their activities, which are not causing deforestation in Europe. And I, as a farmer, I also to face the climate change. Climate change is not a concept for me. It means for me, and in my farm, drought, flood, freeze, high temperature, I've never, nor my father, known before. So this is a call for action addressed to the European institution. So please do proceed to help mitigate climate change by controlling deforestation.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your intervention. And I'm turning now to you, Mr. Dorfman. You are a long-standing member also of the Agricultural Committee in the European Parliament. Very glad to have you here with us today. And I understand you are also facing a big issue here because if on the one hand, farmers, as Benjamin said, have to follow sustainability criteria in Europe, and with the Green Deal, perhaps even more stringent criteria, we have the issue of importing deforestation, importing products that were created, originating in deforested areas. So, Mr. Dorfman, a big challenge, and we are very keen to hear your views on that.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mr. Pacheco and Farm Europe, for this kind invitation. It's a pleasure for me to say some of very personal thoughts about this topic. Well, first of all, I think if it comes to deforestation, we have to speak about the situation inside the European Union and outside the European Union. I do not think that we have a big problem of deforestation inside the European Union. This does not mean that we do not have forests in the European Union which are transformed in agricultural land. But I think in the European Union, the bigger question is how much forests are used for urbanization. This is maybe the more important topic, and is never addressed in the public, or is not that much addressed in the public debate. And there may be, even if inside the European Union overall the surface, the amount of forest increase, there may be spots where even inside the European Union we have to look at deforestation. Also for the question of biodiversity, we had in the past very important and high value forests which we lost because national and local authorities permitted to intervene or to cut this forest, and then we need to have a look also on this. But I think, and then I immediately come to the real topic of the afternoon, so deforestation outside Europe. The technology AIRBUS presented today might be interesting also inside the European Union, because I think we need a debate about carbon sinks inside the European Union and the possibility agriculture and forestry has to address carbon change and to capture carbon from the atmosphere. And we have indeed a lot of land in Europe which is not used today and which could be used for forests. And I think to have a technology available where this can be controlled and we can have an overlook what is going on even inside the European Union could be interesting also inside the European Union. Then it comes to the more important and pertinent question about deforestation outside the European Union. Well, I could be a bit sarcastic and say what they are doing in Brazil now or Indonesia now is exactly the same thing we did hundreds of years ago. So it's a bit easy for us to put the finger to Brazil and to Indonesia and say you are now cutting forests to transform this in agricultural land. This is exactly we did in the last 2000 years or even more inside the European Union. But this does not mean that we need to close the eyes on what's going on, or we need, or I think we have the responsibility in the European Union to do everything in order to halt and to reverse global deforestation, as it has been mentioned, the European Union, the European Parliament, the 22nd of October, voted on a resolution on global deforestation, also in view of a legislation which we already debated today. We know that outside the European Union, more or less 75 to 80% of the global deforestation is due to agriculture or transformation of forests in agricultural land. And we know that the European Union has its responsibility in this. And this, I think, is especially important, or the truth for two big regions in the world, is South America and is Asia, and is for 2 to 3 important products. One of them is proteins, soybeans first of all, then oil seeds, palm oil, and then maybe on a lower degree also sugar. This is more or less the big commodities which we are going to import from the European Union into the European Union, and which are for sure a driver for global deforestation. For sure also meat, but meat is very much connected then with proteins and with soybeans. We have a long debate, or we have a long debate about the production of soybeans, of proteins inside the European Union. It is an important debate, but we do not really make step forwards. And also in the reform of the common agriculture policy, we are debating right now. This is an important topic. I personally think the question is very, very easy. For our farmers, it's not profitable to produce proteins, because on arable land in Europe, it's more profitable to produce other things. Wheat, first of all, maize. And this is the main reason, because farmers in Europe do not produce soya anymore. We could say, okay, this is a typical thing where we need to intervene politically with a coupled support for the production of soybean, but we all know that we have the limitations from the Blair House Agreement, which is close to 30 years old, but is still in force and puts us some limits to, let's say, to support actively the production of proteins. So I personally think we have to insist on rotation. We have to insist that on normal, so-called normal arable land in Europe, there is a certain amount of protein plants, because this is the only possibility I see for now to have really a big amount of protein production inside the European Union, and we need to insist on this. And then, and this is a very personal idea, maybe it's not that much for my political group, but I'm asking myself more and more if everything we are doing in Europe in a so-called agriculture, but very often it's not that much agriculture, it's not my model of European agriculture, is really a sustainable model. And to put it very easily, we have a very recent study from the Commission where you see the more we open markets, worldwide markets, from the European Union to other parts of the world, the more we import proteins and the more we export milk products, first of all, skimmed milk powder and pork meat. So to put it, and I know it's a bit maybe too simple, but is it in the real interest of the European farmers to have cheap proteins at their disposal, to produce high amounts of milk and of pork meat, which we do not meet in Europe, and to export this to China and have the manure in Europe, seeing that this is more or less, or more and more a model which is very much concentrated in some parts of the European Union, close to the big harbors in the northern part of Europe, and is more and more not a model anymore connected with a European model of agriculture, but is more and more an industrial transformation of proteins in meat and in milk, and puts pressure on the rest of the milk market in Europe and the rest of the meat market in Europe. And I'm really asking myself, so if we see this, and I'm not a green politician, but if we see this, wouldn't it be interesting, also in the interest of the farmers themselves, to have a system of certification and of labeling for proteins from outside the European Union, which would mean at the end, I think, that the proteins coming from outside get more expensive. So milk and meat production in Europe with foreign proteins will become a bit more expensive. This would make a boost on the European production and would make more interesting the production of proteins in Europe, and would a bit maybe decrease this model, which is, and I'm very open on open markets in the world. I always been in favor of a free and fair globalization, but I think globalization needs to make a sense. And I think even if we speak now about Mercosur, and we will have to speak about Mercosur in the next months, in the next year here in the European Parliament, we should have this in mind. So I would like to conclude here. I think if it comes to a proposal of the Commission about the labeling, about a better look, what is going on certain commodities trade, especially, as I said, proteins, palm oil, oilseeds, sugar. I think it is also in the interest of the farmers, European farmers themselves, that there is a system in place where you can, everybody, the consumer first of all, but also the farmers can see what they are going to buy and what are the consequences on this, on the environment, and especially the forest in the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorfman. And I'm turning now to the European Commission. All the eyes are on the European Commission. You have, everybody's waiting for you to act now after the resolution of the European Parliament. Mr. Jorge Rodriguez Romero, you represent here today DG Environment. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation from Europe for this very interesting debate. And I see that you mentioned that all the eyes are put on us. I mean, we are very intensively working at the moment to deliver and hopefully meet the expectations of many. But the advantage of talking at the end is that a lot has been said, and a lot very valuable contributions that already show how rich the debate on deforestation is. It's an environmental issue, but it's a trade issue. It's dealing with agriculture, both inside the EU and outside. It's dealing with development cooperation, with development opportunities and expectations of third countries that we need to take into account. It's a complex debate, and I think I have been listening very attentive to many interventions and find the debate very rich. As you know, in 2019 already, the European Commission published a communication to step up our efforts to protect forests. And there we already announced that we were planning a proposal to address deforestation, a legislative proposal. This has been confirmed in the European Green Deal and the EU biodiversity strategy. And of course, this has been the subject of the resolution of the European Parliament that has already been mentioned several times that Monsieur Canfin so eloquently presented. That we are following up as well as a commitment done by our president towards the European Parliament to follow up on any of the legislative proposals that they would put forward. So the objective is to minimize the risk of deforestation or forest degradation associated with products placed in the EU market. And this objective already embeds very interesting and important subjects. We are dealing with deforestation, but we have to deal also with the complex matter of forest degradation. I think it was mentioned already, I think it was Mr. Sachet in his presentation about the example of Ivory Coast, how forest degradation also impacts the ability of the forest to deliver on all the benefits that they bring, but it's very elusive and difficult to detect and to follow. So this is already a challenge. And then we are talking about minimizing the risk associated with products placed in the EU market. And this means that we are not only dealing with imported deforestation, but we are dealing with all the deforestation or forest degradation associated with products placed in the market. We cannot pretend that we apply some rules for the outside world and not apply them to ourselves. So that's a very important consideration, because also we have, as the European Union, responsibilities in championing free trade and in having a rules-based approach to international trade that we need to respect. So just to give you a bit more detail about our current work, We are aiming at presenting a proposal in the second quarter of this year, so very soon. So that's why I'm saying that we are very intensively working at the moment. We have, I mentioned the general objective, but of course we have some elements of objectives that are a bit more specific. We want to, as I said, minimize the EU contribution to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide, but we want also to raise awareness of consumers, which is a very important subject that was mentioned as well. We want to promote the demand for commodities and products which are not associated with deforestation, and we have to incentivize the right decisions. We have a complex policy context because we have already in the EU certain legislation that addresses the problem of deforestation, but only to a limited extent. We have, I have mentioned it, the European Parliament resolution, but we have also the Council, recent Council conclusions calling and supporting this initiative. And we have other initiatives within the Commission that touches and interlink with this initiative that I'm talking about. For example, we are talking about an initiative on sustainable corporate responsibility. There is an upcoming forest strategy that we are working on as well, etc. And we have an international landscape which is also very rich. We have, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals that look at these different aspects of development in a comprehensive way. And I think that this is a very relevant context to the discussion on deforestation because of the different aspects that I was mentioning at the beginning of my intervention. We have, of course, the climate change commitments, the Paris Agreement. We have the Convention on Biological Diversity and the objective and the commitment from the EU to halt biodiversity loss, and embedded in this biodiversity strategy that we published last year, and then in the run-up to the global biodiversity framework that will be decided later this year in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we have at global level developments on protection of forests, the UN Forum on Forests and the related global agreements related to forests, which are not legally binding, but still provide a useful context on this, to this initiative. We are working mainly on three main blocks. We are working first on what is deforestation-free, and this is a very challenging subject to define operationally what deforestation-free means. We want to base the deforestation on solid science. We want to base it to the extent possible in definitions already accepted internationally. We need to ensure that it is not discriminatory, as I was mentioned earlier, and overall it needs to be implementable in practice, because this will be the basis of the legislative proposal. And there, I think some of the contributions that we have seen have been extremely interesting. Then the second block that we are working on is the scope, what this initiative will apply to. Mr. Dorfman was already mentioning a list of commodities which are associated with deforestation. We can mention wood, palm oil, beef, soy, rubber, cereals, cocoa, coffee. We are working on it. We are looking at the latest information. We want to be, as I said, science-based. So we want to base our proposal on facts in order to define the scope of these commodities and derived products so that we can ensure that we capture the bulk or the main proportion of the problem. And then, of course, the third block is about which measures will be proposed to address this matter on the basis of the definition and the scope. And the options for measures, I think we have very attentively, of course, took note and considered the proposals in the European Parliament's resolution. And we are, however, looking at a broad range of possible measures for their efficiency, for their effectiveness, and all in the context of this impact assessment that we are carrying out. We are looking certainly to due diligence as a possible option. We are also looking at benchmarking of countries. There are some experiences in Europe in other policy domains which are very interesting, and we are looking closely at this. This can also reduce costs for due diligence for companies. We are looking at public certification. We are looking at labeling as well. We are looking at deforestation-free requirement. So these are elements that we are looking at in our impact assessment closely and analyzing in order to ensure that we come up with a proposal that is the most effective and cost efficient. We are basing also our analysis on the lessons learned from the experience we have in implementing the EU timber regulation, which has been implemented for a number of years and has a due diligence requirement in there, and also the FLEGT regulation for timber. So we are learning from those experiences in order to develop this proposal. I want to recall that we carried out an open public consultation last year. So there is a huge interest on this proposal. And as it has been already mentioned, we received more than 1 million replies. It was the second most popular public consultation launched by the EU so far. And we have got a very strong support for this initiative. Support also to establish binding measures that are seen by most of respondents as more efficient than voluntary measures that have shown that have been insufficient to address the challenge that we have ahead. And interestingly, and I think in the panel we had an example of this, majority of businesses who replied support EU measures. They see this as an opportunity also to reduce unfair competition from companies that are not so environmental or socially responsible. So I think this is a bit what I wanted to say, to introduce, and I am looking forward to if there is any question or anything that you may want me to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez Romero. And now we have time for debate within this panel, and I have a couple of questions already. Perhaps I'll start with the questions. And indeed, I have one question. I'm very tempted to first ask you for your reaction, Mr. Dorfman. It relates to import of meat from Brazil. And the question is, how can we make sure that imported meat from Brazil is exempt from deforestation, is deforestation-free? And also, how can we do it in a WTO compatible manner? You want to have a start there, Mr. Dorfman?
Yeah, I'm well aware that this is an important question. I'm myself rapporteur here in the European Parliament for the agriculture side and the farm to fork strategy, and even there we underline that having more important criteria or much more challenging criteria for food production in the European Union, we must guarantee this also outside the European Union at the border. But I'm at the same time aware that we have obligations from the WTO, especially if it comes to the trade of food products. I think this must be one of the important topics in the Mercosur agreement, because this is a Mercosur agreement where we have an overall debate with the governments in South America, and we need to convince these governments that they need to address the problem of deforestation if they want to have a general trade or an increased trade with the European Union. I do not think that we can solve this problem looking only at the trade of meat or the import of meat inside the European Union. I think it's a more general. We need a more general approach in the agreement.
Thank you. I don't know if you, Benjamin, or you, Mr. Rodriguez Romero, you want to add something to this response? No? I have another question, and now I'm tempted to put that to you, Benjamin. It relates, you are a soya producer, and it relates to proteins and soya. There are two questions that we can put together here. We have heard already in the first panel that one of the issues for Europe is to have, as possible, I would add, autonomy in terms of protein production. And we have also someone asking, why are we still importing GMO soya from third countries? Do you want to pick these questions and give us your opinion, and then others, Mr. Dorfman, Mr. Rodriguez Romero, feel free.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Joao. The problem about and you mentioned it, Mr. Dorfman, the problem of the imported protein is the price of the imported protein. And we are not sufficiently competitive in Europe. So, but this is not the end of the story, because if I look backward in the 5 past years, we have multiplied the area of soybean in France by 4 and almost to 5 times more in 5 years. So, and we are still rising in this way. So, but there is at the end of the game the question of the price that the consumer is ready to pay. Because if we produce European proteins that are GM-free, that are not deforesting, and so on, they have a better quality for the environment, that whether the consumer, whether the public policies, whether environmental services should pay and to help producer to go in this way. But I'm not sure that for the whole amount of production of milk and of pork meat, consumer will be ready to pay for these services. So we hope so, but in the fact we are aiming at, but it's quite difficult to put it in place. But everything that can help will help us in this way.
Thank you. Mr. Dorfman, do you want to add something?
No, not much. I already said before, if I take, for example, my own state, Italy, we had 30 years ago a very important production of soybeans, of proteins in Italy, which disappeared more or less because of the competition problem, and also because of the international obligations we had or we have since the Blair House Accord, where substantially we do not have that much possibilities, if I see it from our European Common Agricultural Policy perspective, to support directly the production of soybeans. So as I said before, I really think if we want to achieve the target of the farm to fork strategy to have a lower input of nitrogen fertilizers in Europe, and at the same time a higher production of proteins, we need to address this in the normal rotation obligations inside the common agricultural policy, because there we speak really about big amounts, and I think this is, at least I see it for now, the only possibility to increase really importantly the production. And as Benjamin said before, what is the reason for this increase in France? Is substantially is the effect of the last reform of the common agricultural policy, where with the greening obligations there was a need, or became interesting in the non-productive features for the farmers to produce soybeans.
I could also mention that we already have a big amount of vegetable proteins available in the European Union by the co-products of biofuels. So we don't have to, we have to remember that, and we have to protect this source of protein in this debate.
Indeed. Thank you for your responses. Now I have two questions for you, Mr. Rodriguez Romero. The first question is a question on the compatibility between the initiative of your commissioner that you mentioned too, and the other initiative from Commissioner Reinders on sustainable corporate governance. That is one question. And perhaps I'll just add a second question, which is whether you could shed us some light on which type of legislative act you are considering to propose in the second quarter to tackle this issue of halting import deforestation.
Thank you very much for these questions. On the interplay with the initiative that is led by our colleagues from DG Just on corporate sustainability, we see these initiatives as complementary. So our initiative on deforestation focuses on addressing a specific supply chains of a series of products or commodities often associated to deforestation. The one on corporate sustainability, sustainable corporate responsibility, addresses due diligence in an horizontal way. We'll deal with general company obligations and a wider range of sustainability issues, including human rights issues and social aspects. So we are working closely together with our colleagues from DG Just on these two initiatives to ensure complementarity and coherence. But as I said, while our initiative is very much focused on these commodities and in the supply chain, DG Just initiative is more at the level of company obligations and covering a wider range of sustainability issues. So we see them completely complementary. And on the question of which type of instrument, it is not yet decided, but we think that the most probable instrument would be a regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if you would like to come back with some final comments in the panel. You have the opportunity now. Otherwise, I would thank you very much for your participation. I think we had a very interesting presentations and a very interesting debate. Thank you. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Irène Tolleret. You are also a member of the European Parliament, and we are eager to listen to your final comments to our webinar today. Please.
Thank you very much, João, and thank you very much for FAM Europe and all the participants for a very, very interesting debate on a key subject that we have to face and to solve. I would like to give you first the 3 words that really have struck me. It's humility, cooperation, and decisiveness. Humility, because in face with climate change and all the impact it has and the link with deforestation, we need to accept that maybe we will take time, but we want to go there. Cooperation, because the subject is worldwide and with different ways to live it inside the European and outside the European. And as it was very well said, we need cooperation on that, and decisiveness, because we need to tackle the subject with a binding measure. As Pascal Canfin stressed, the products imported from deforested areas in the EU can be reduced in a progressive way. The political will of the European Parliament is very clear. In the resolution in the initiative report on deforestation, the European Parliament proposed to ban them. Mr. Romero pointed out the fact that imports from certain countries are accompanied not only by deforestation, but also by forest degradation. The European Commission is considering the introduction of banning and also voluntary measures. The subject of forest degradation is also a subject that we have inside the European Union, and it was not formulated, but we need to put research on that. We need to put research because some forests are dying, so we need to identify which species need to be put, and also work on the forest strategy to make sure that the production of the forest industry are maximized, which means also having a circular economy on wood. It's clear also that what we have heard today, compared to deforestation linked with agriculture, we have the means to control it with satellites. It has been very, very clearly brought to the attention of all the participants. And I think that it is not possible that we continue to rely only on certifications given by operators in exporting countries, the value of which can be discussed. And as Mr. Dorfman said, we have been in this position 1,000 years ago. So we need to really understand what is happening, but also have the tools to measure very precisely. And it's very important that these tools exist. The due diligence that obligations that Mr. Lombard mentioned on import operators has also been raised by the European Parliament. So we are in the same boat and rowing in the same direction. And also, I think the European Union, you should not be naive. We have to ensure for a given community that it comes from a non-deforested area, but also that there is no cross effect in the exporting country. This is the case, for instance, of Brazilian beef. Deforestation is done on valuable trees, then for the production of charcoal with the less valuable trees, and after a while, the land is done for pasture. This strengthens Brazilian meat production and frees up additional exportable volumes from other areas in Brazil. So we must therefore have a sufficiently fine-grained analysis at all levels. That's the understanding that we need to build together. Trade interests with third countries should also not take over the protection of world forests. All trade agreements should contain legally provisions regarding the respect of the Paris agreements, also in line with the European Parliament Union. I also would like to add the 3 last points on that should be taken into account when we talk about deforestation. The fight against deforestation is also a fight in favor of human rights, since the phenomenon goes very often along with human rights violations and follows from it as stressed by the European Parliament in its resolution. The second point is the European Union should reinforce its collaboration with producer countries to help them reduce pressure on forests. It's very important that it's not the European Union that has done its arable lands that give lessons to those who don't have it. So it's important that we work together and understand that the Brazilian farmers, they need to have an income that comes from somewhere. So if it doesn't come from deforestation, we need to help them build it from somewhere else. I think so. And also, it's very important to strengthen the cooperation with international organisms as FAO to halt deforestation. We talk about ocean as a common good for humanity. It's high time that we do something on the forests at the same scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tolleret, for ending this webinar with your very interesting comments. Let me thank all the participants today and the panelists for being with us. This is a very important topic. I do believe we had a very interesting debate in terms of policy perspectives, in terms of technological possibilities, and also in terms of the challenges that we will face in this way forward. Thank you very much. It's not the end of it, but I believe it was a good participation to the issue. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.